There is a hidden curse woven into the gift of empathy. It is not spoken aloud nor easily recognized, but it lingers like a shadow over the heart of those who feel too deeply. The world praises compassion. It tells us to be kind is to be virtuous, to forgive is to be holy, to love without condition is the highest calling of the soul, and the empath listens. They embody this message, carrying the pain of others as though it were sacred duty. But beneath this noble light, Jung would remind us, lies shadow. For every gift carries its distortion. And for the empath, the distortion is this compassion turned against the self. This is the unforgivable sin of the empath. Not that they loved too little, but that they loved to the point of erasure. Not that they failed to forgive, but that they forgave at the cost of their own soul. It begins quietly, almost invisibly. A parent's unmet need, a lover's endless hunger, a friend's constant turmoil, and the empath learns. My worth is measured by how much I can absorb, how much I can endure, how much of myself I can give away. At first it feels like love. The giving, the healing, the selflessness, these feel like light. But over time something shifts. Their compassion is no longer a gift they choose, but a compulsion they cannot refuse. They become prisoners of their own kindness. Here is the tragedy. The empath believes they are saving others, but in truth, they are abandoning themselves. Their compassion, instead of a bridge to connection, becomes a weapon turned inward, a slow, merciless blade cutting away their own boundaries, their own voice, their own worth. The narcissist, the wounded predator, senses this vulnerability instantly. They recognize the empath's curse and exploit it. For what better prey than one who believes their sacred duty is to forgive endlessly, to endure silently, to give without limit? But the deepest betrayal is not from the narcissist. It is from within. The empath begins to condemn themselves for even daring to feel exhausted, for longing to be seen, for whispering enough. They call it selfishness. They name it failure. They brand it sin. This is the cruel inversion of empathy. The gift that should liberate becomes a prison. The light that should guide becomes a chain. And so the empath carries their secret guilt. They smile while their soul bleeds. They forgive when their heart cries out for justice. They give even as their body trembles with emptiness. Because somewhere deep inside they believe the lie. To care for myself is unforgivable. To turn compassion inward is betrayal. Jung would call this the shadow of empathy. The archetype distorted, the moonlight swallowed by its own reflection. And thus the curse takes hold. The empath does not need an external judge, for they have become their own executioner. Their greatest sin, they believe, is not cruelty, but self-preservation. Not violence, but the refusal to be endlessly consumed. This is the starting point of the journey, the recognition that compassion left unexamined can become its own poison. That empathy, when stripped of boundaries, ceases to be a gift and becomes a wound. The empath's unforgivable sin is not that they love too much. It is that they forget that they too are worthy of the love they so freely give. And until this curse is broken, their compassion will remain both their crown and their cross. Every pattern has a beginning. Every curse is born from a wound. And the empath's relentless urge to heal others did not arise by accident. It began in childhood, in the quiet spaces where unmet needs carved deep grooves into the soul. Picture a child with eyes wide open to the moods of the adults around them. A child who learns far too early that peace in the home depends on their silence, their compliance, their ability to anticipate what others need before it is spoken. If the parent is angry, they soothe. If the parent is sad, they comfort. If the parent is absent, they fill the void with vigilance and care. This is the birth of the empath's gift, but also the origin of their wound. For the child discovers that love is not given freely. It must be earned. It must be bargained for with self-erasure. It must be secured through constant caretaking. Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest burden a child carries is the unlived life of the parent. And the empath knows this burden intimately. They inherit not just love but longing, not just protection, but projection. They become the emotional container for what their caregivers could not face in themselves. And so the child grows into an adult with a sacred vow etched unconsciously into their being. If I can heal others, if I can make them whole, then I will finally be worthy of love. Then I will finally be safe. This vow is both beautiful and tragic. Beautiful because it gives the empath their extraordinary sensitivity, their instinctive compassion, their near psychic ability to read others' wounds. Tragic because it binds their worth to something outside themselves forever, tethering their identity to the brokenness of another. The compulsion to heal, then, is not merely generosity. It is survival. It is the only language of love they were ever taught. And in adulthood, this pattern repeats. The empath seeks out the wounded, the fractured, the unreachable. They are drawn almost magnetically to those who cannot love them fully, because deep down they believe wholeness can only be earned by healing the impossible. This is why the narcissist feels like destiny. The narcissist embodies the exact paradox the empath has been rehearsing since childhood. Someone who dazzles with strength, but trembles with hidden weakness. Someone who demands everything, yet offers so little in return. It is the perfect stage for the empath's vow to unfold again. If I can save them, maybe I can finally save myself. But the truth is merciless. The empath cannot save what refuses to be healed. And in pouring their energy endlessly outward, they repeat the original wound neglect of the self. Here lies the core paradox. The empath's compassion was born as adaptation. It was the armor that kept them safe in a world where love felt conditional. But what once protected them now endangers them. The armor has fused with their skin. Until this is recognized, the empath will continue to confuse healing others with healing themselves, and compassion will continue to serve as both crown and curse. The origin of the empath's longing is not weakness nor naivety. It is the echo of a child who wanted nothing more than to be held, seen, and loved for who they were. But instead they were taught to disappear. And so the adult empath carries the vow forward, and the vow whispers, "If I can make others whole, maybe someone will finally see me." This is the wound beneath the gift. This is the seed of both their radiance and their ruin. Compassion is meant to be a river flowing alive, nourishing everything it touches. But for the empath, this river can harden into chains. What begins as a gift slowly transforms into a burden, and what once felt like freedom begins to taste like captivity. At first, the empath believes their compassion is choice. They comfort, they forgive, they sacrifice. It feels noble, almost divine, to be the one who absorbs suffering and offers healing in return. But gradually, choice fades. The giving is no longer voluntary. It is expected. The forgiveness is no longer sacred. It is demanded. The sacrifice is no longer seen as generosity, but as debt. And the empath, unable to say no, begins to feel the weight of an invisible shackle. They tell themselves, "This is who I am. This is my purpose, to care for others no matter the cost." But beneath that vow lies exhaustion. Beneath the exhaustion lies quiet resentment. And beneath the resentment lies guilt, because even the thought of holding back compassion feels like betrayal. Here is the tragedy. The very quality that makes the empath radiant, their endless capacity to feel, becomes the weapon that binds them. They become enslaved, not by the cruelty of others, but by their own distorted sense of duty. Carl Jung taught that an archetype, when left unconscious, becomes possession. And the empath, possessed by the archetype of the healer, no longer acts freely. They are driven, compelled, consumed. Their compassion ceases to be light. It becomes compulsion. Others sense this and exploit it. Partners, friends, even strangers recognize the empath's inability to refuse. They lean on them, drain them, guilt them into endless service. The empath, terrified of failing their sacred role, complies until their own body and soul begin to fracture. It is a slow erosion. The empath skips meals to listen to another's despair. They silence their truth to protect another's pride. They dismiss their needs to soothe another's emptiness. Bit by bit, they vanish not through malice but through overextension. This is when compassion ceases to liberate and begins to imprison. The river has turned into chains. And yet when the empath feels the weight of these chains, they do not rage at those who exploit them. They rage at themselves. They ask, "Why can't I give more? Why am I so weak? Why do I feel so empty when my purpose is to heal?" The cruel paradox is this: the empath does not realize that their exhaustion is not failure, it is evidence of bondage. They believe they are guilty of not loving enough, when in truth they are guilty only of forgetting themselves. This is the unforgivable sin, as the empath experiences it, not cruelty toward others, but the faintest act of self-preservation. To say I cannot feels like betrayal. To say I matter too feels like sin. And so the chains tighten. Compassion, once a gift, now holds them captive. Their love is no longer light, it is labor. Their empathy is no longer sacred, it is shackled. The empath becomes a prisoner of their own vow. And the walls of this prison are not built by others, but by their own hands, brick by brick, every time they said yes, when their soul whispered no. This is how kindness becomes captivity. This is how the river hardens into chains. The empath's chains would be heavy enough on their own. But fate has a cruel way of tightening them further by introducing the narcissist. The narcissist arrives like a mirror, polished, dazzling, captivating. But this mirror is not meant to reflect truth. It is meant to ensnare. At first, the empath does not see the trap. They see only brilliance, charm, the intoxicating glow of someone who seems larger than life. But beneath that glow lies hunger. Not hunger for connection, not hunger for intimacy, hunger for supply. The narcissist is starving, not for love, but for reflection. They need eyes that admire, hearts that worship, souls that surrender. And the empath, bound by the vow to heal, becomes the perfect offering. This is the silent betrayal. The empath believes their compassion is building intimacy, while the narcissist is only building a supply line. The empath offers unconditional love. The narcissist converts it into fuel. The empath pours out empathy like water. The narcissist drinks but never quenches their thirst, because no matter how much is given, the void inside them remains unfilled. Carl Jung wrote of the persona, the mask we wear to survive. For the narcissist, the mask is everything. Behind it lies unbearable shame, an unhealed shadow they cannot confront. So they craft a facade, the flawless partner, the brilliant thinker, the untouchable star. And they need the empath to keep this mask alive. The empath, sensing the shadow behind the mask, whispers inwardly, "I can heal this. I can love them back to wholeness." But the narcissist never offers their shadow for healing. They only offer the mask. And here the betrayal deepens. The empath believes they are chosen because they are seen. In truth, they are chosen because they are useful. The narcissist does not fall in love with the empath's soul. They fall in love with the reflection of themselves in the empath's eyes. It is a subtle theft, almost invisible at first. Every compliment the empath gives becomes a brick in the narcissist's false fortress. Every sacrifice the empath makes becomes proof that their mask is working. Every tear shed in private becomes another drop of fuel that sustains the illusion. The empath does not see the betrayal immediately. They feel only confusion. Why does their love not seem to reach the other's heart? Why does their compassion never soften the other's cruelty? Why does every act of giving only lead to more hunger, more demand? This is the cruelest twist. The empath believes they are failing. They believe their compassion is not enough. They blame themselves for the emptiness the narcissist cannot fill. But in truth, it was never theirs to fill. The betrayal is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is silent. It happens in 1,000 small moments, each time the empath gives and the narcissist takes without gratitude. Each time the empath hopes and the narcissist delivers only emptiness. Each time the empath reaches for a soul and touches only a mask. This is the essence of the silent betrayal. The empath offers love. The narcissist offers reflection. One seeks connection. The other seeks fuel. And so the chains of compassion tighten further. The empath does not yet see it, but they are no longer loving freely. They are being consumed, not by malice, but by a void too vast to ever be filled. And the mirror, once dazzling, begins to distort. Silence can be holy. It can be the pause that heals, the stillness that restores. But for the empath, silence often becomes something else, not sacred, but suffocating. It begins subtly. A sharp look when they speak their truth. A mocking laugh when they show vulnerability. A heavy sigh when they express a need. The empath who longs for harmony above all learns quickly. They swallow their words. They soften their voice. They silence their truth. At first it feels like compromise, like maturity, like love. They tell themselves, this is how relationships work. This is how peace is kept. Better I remain quiet than risk conflict. But what begins as compromise soon becomes erasure. The empath stops mentioning what hurts them. They dismiss their instincts as overreactions. They minimize their desires, convincing themselves they are unimportant. They apologize for needing anything at all. This is the betrayal of self that grows in silence. The narcissist, whether consciously or not, encourages this erasure. They reward compliance with fleeting affection. They punish honesty with coldness or disdain. And so the empath internalizes a dangerous law. My needs are threats. My silence is love. Each time they suppress their truth, the empath loses a piece of themselves. The laughter that once rose freely now feels guarded. The dreams that once glowed brightly now dim into shadows. The voice that once spoke boldly now echoes only in their mind. And yet the outside world sees none of this. To friends, to family, the empath may appear devoted, patient, endlessly forgiving. They wear their silence like a badge of virtue. They call it sacrifice. They call it loyalty. They call it love. But deep inside, something begins to ache. A dull, persistent ache, the soul's way of reminding them that they are vanishing. Jung taught that what we repress does not disappear. It descends into the unconscious where it festers, waiting for the moment it must be faced. And the empath's silence is not absence, it is repression. Every unspoken truth becomes a stone in their chest. Every unexpressed need becomes a weight on their spine. Every stifled dream becomes a ghost haunting their nights. They begin to feel the cost. Exhaustion, confusion, anxiety that hums beneath the surface, depression that whispers, maybe I was never meant to take up space. Maybe disappearing is my purpose. Here lies the cruel inversion. The empath believes their silence is noble, but in truth it is the slowest form of self-betrayal, and yet they cling to it, because breaking the silence feels dangerous, because speaking truth feels like sin, because somewhere deep inside they have been taught that love requires invisibility. This is the quiet tragedy of the empath. They do not realize that in silencing themselves to preserve the relationship, they are destroying the very essence of who they are. And so their compassion, once radiant, once alive, becomes muffled beneath the weight of words never spoken. The world hears only silence, but within a storm rages unacknowledged, unseen. The empath calls this devotion, but the soul calls it abandonment. There is a cruel paradox that lives at the heart of the empath's journey. The more they give, the more they feel they have failed. At first, their kindness feels boundless. Each act of forgiveness seems to shine with virtue. Each sacrifice feels like proof of devotion. Each moment of self-erasure is reframed as love. But over time, something poisonous creeps in. No matter how much they give, it is never enough. The anger of the narcissist does not soften. The void they try to fill does not close. The wounds they attempt to heal do not mend. And slowly the empath turns the blade inward. They begin to believe the problem is not in the other, but in themselves. If I were more patient, they would not rage. If I were more loving, they would not withdraw. If I were truly good, truly kind, they would finally feel whole. Each thought carves guilt deeper into their soul. Here lies the most tragic distortion of compassion. The empath takes responsibility not only for their own feelings, but for everyone else's. And when those around them remain wounded, angry, or distant, they believe it is their failure. This is how kindness becomes sin. Not in reality, but in the empath's mind. They come to see their exhaustion as weakness, their boundaries as selfishness, their unmet needs as evidence of moral failure. The narcissist consciously or unconsciously reinforces this lie. They say, "You're too sensitive. You're never satisfied. You always make things harder than they need to be." And the empath, already prone to self-blame, absorbs these words like truth. Carl Jung wrote that the shadow does not only contain our darkness, but also our light, those qualities of strength, worth, and self-love that we repress. For the empath, their shadow often contains the very truth they cannot accept. I deserve care. I am allowed to receive. I am not responsible for everyone else. But instead of embracing this truth, they bury it, and the burial becomes guilt. The empath walks the world carrying a quiet, unbearable shame. Shame for being tired. Shame for needing comfort. Shame for wanting reciprocity. Shame for even daring to imagine a love that gives as much as it takes. They begin to equate self-preservation with betrayal. To them, saying no is not boundary, it is cruelty. To them, asking for respect is not dignity, it is selfishness. And so every step toward protecting themselves feels like sin. This is the unforgivable sin as the empath imagines it. Not violence, not neglect, but the audacity of saying, "I matter too." The cruel irony is that this guilt ensures the cycle continues. The more the empath feels they are failing, the more desperately they try to give. The more they give, the more they feel they are failing still. It is a trap without exit unless they see the lie for what it is. Because the truth is this: it was never their job to save another from their shadow. It was never their failure that the narcissist remained broken. Their kindness was never sin. Their only mistake was believing that compassion meant annihilation of the self. But for now, they do not see it. For now, they remain bound, carrying the unbearable weight of a guilt that was never theirs to bear. There is a moment when disappearance becomes complete. Not dramatic, not sudden, but gradual, like ink spreading across water until the whole surface is dark. This is the fate of the empath. When their compassion turns fully inward against themselves, they become invisible. Invisible not because the world cannot see them, but because they can no longer see themselves. At first it shows in small ways. They stop voicing opinions. They stop mentioning their dreams. They stop asking for help. Soon they stop expecting anything at all. The empath convinces themselves that invisibility is virtue. They call it humility. They call it selflessness. They call it love. But in truth, it is erasure. The narcissist who thrives on dominance and reflection welcomes this vanishing. The less the empath demands, the more space the narcissist has to project their persona. The less the empath shines, the brighter the narcissist appears. And so the empath's disappearance is not resisted, it is rewarded. A cruel equilibrium forms. The empath offers silence, and the narcissist offers illusion. The empath offers invisibility, and the narcissist offers control. The empath offers their very self, and the narcissist offers only shadow in return. But the cost of this arrangement is staggering. Without voice, the empath's truth withers. Without boundaries, their body begins to break under the weight of unspoken stress. Without dreams, their soul dims to a flicker. They move through the world like a ghost, present but hollow, alive but unrecognizable even to themselves. This is the ultimate betrayal of the self, to vanish in the name of love, to abandon one's own essence, while convincing oneself it is noble sacrifice. And the world, blind to this inner collapse, often calls them saints. Such patience, people say, such loyalty, such strength. But the empath knows in the secret chambers of their heart that this is not strength. It is despair. It is the silence of someone who has forgotten they deserve to exist. Carl Jung wrote that what is not made conscious returns as fate. For the empath, their unconscious wound, "I am only valuable when I disappear," becomes lived destiny. They repeat it endlessly, binding themselves to those who exploit it, until invisibility feels like identity itself. And here lies the cruelest wound of all. When the empath finally breaks beneath the weight of their own silence, when they collapse from exhaustion or dissolve in despair, they are often told, "You chose this. You're too sensitive. You did this to yourself." Their suffering is dismissed as weakness, their invisibility mistaken for willingness, their wounds framed as self-inflicted. This is the price of being unseen, not only the loss of self, but the denial of their very pain. The empath becomes a shadow twice over, erased by their own silence, and erased again by a world that refuses to acknowledge their suffering. And yet within this unbearable void, something begins to stir. Because invisibility, though it feels like death, is not the end. It is the threshold. For in the depth of erasure lies the faint memory of a self that once laughed, once dreamed, once demanded to exist. And though buried, that memory does not die. It waits. It waits for the moment when the silence cracks, when the unbearable weight forces a reckoning. But until then, the empath pays the price of their invisibility, a life half-lived, a soul half-forgotten, a truth smothered beneath the guise of sacrifice. Every illusion reaches a breaking point. Every silence eventually fractures. For the empath, the reckoning does not come with a scream, but with a realization so sharp it cuts deeper than any word. The sin was never my compassion. The sin was that I abandoned myself. The awakening often arrives in a single ordinary moment, perhaps in the quiet, after yet another argument, when the narcissist's voice still echoes. But the empath feels nothing but emptiness. Perhaps in front of a mirror, where tired eyes no longer recognize the face staring back. Perhaps in the midst of despair, when the body whispers what the soul has long known, "I cannot go on like this." It is not dramatic. It is devastatingly simple. They see with clarity, both painful and luminous, that no amount of giving has ever been enough, because the hunger they were trying to fill was not theirs to feed. They see that forgiveness, when demanded endlessly, ceases to be sacred. They see that silence has not preserved love, but murdered it. This is the moment of reflection, the shattering of the great lie that love requires invisibility, that compassion requires annihilation, that to care for oneself is betrayal. The empath realizes, the betrayal was never in protecting myself. The betrayal was in leaving myself behind. Carl Jung called this confrontation with shadow the most difficult but also the most necessary step of individuation. For the empath, the shadow is not cruelty, but the truth. They were too afraid to embrace that their life, their needs, their boundaries matter just as much as anyone else's. The realization is searing. Grief rises not just for the relationship that has crumbled, but for the years of self-erasure, the countless moments of silence, the dreams suffocated in the name of devotion. They grieve not only the loss of another, but the loss of themselves. And yet within this grief lies something holy. Because grief means the soul is stirring. Grief means they have finally recognized the absence. Grief means they are ready to reclaim what was abandoned. The narcissist may rage at this shift. They may accuse you're selfish, you've changed, you're ungrateful. But the empath no longer absorbs these words as truth. For the first time, they feel the faint pulse of self-respect beating beneath the shame. And it whispers, "I am allowed to exist. I am allowed to be whole." This is the true turning point. Not the end of pain, but the beginning of honesty. Not the erasure of compassion, but the redirection of it first inward, then outward. The empath begins to see that compassion without boundaries is not love, but bondage. That self-preservation is not betrayal, but responsibility. That the greatest lie they ever believed was that love could only be proven through suffering. And so the reflection begins to shift. The mirror no longer shows only absence. It begins to reveal a self, fragile, wounded, but undeniably alive. The moment of reckoning does not free the empath completely, but it opens the door. And through that door, the first rays of dawn begin to enter the long night. The truth has been spoken not aloud, but within. And once heard, it cannot be silenced again. Compassion has always been the empath's crown, their sacred fire. But until now, that fire burned only outward, warming others, healing others, keeping others alive. The empath stood in the cold, watching their own flame flicker lower with every sacrifice. After the reckoning comes a radical shift. For the first time, the empath dares to turn the flame inward. And what they discover is nothing short of revolutionary. At first, it feels strange, even selfish, to sit quietly and ask, what do I need to feel exhaustion and say I deserve rest? To feel pain and whisper, this matters. My suffering counts too. The old guilt rises immediately like a ghost. You're betraying your duty. You're abandoning others. You're weak for needing what you should give. But the empath has begun to see the lie, and with trembling courage they answer no. Caring for myself is not betrayal. It is the foundation of everything. This is the birth of a new compassion, one that begins at home. They begin to practice boundaries not as walls of anger, but as circles of protection. They learn to say no, not with cruelty, but with clarity. They learn to say yes, not from compulsion, but from genuine choice. Each boundary is an act of self-respect. Each refusal is a declaration, I am not here to be consumed. Each moment of self-care is a reclamation of dignity. Carl Jung wrote that individuation requires embracing both light and shadow, holding the paradox of our nature without collapse. For the empath, individuation means realizing that compassion is not infinite. It requires balance, rootedness, and reciprocity. They begin to honor their own shadow, the parts they once repressed, the anger they buried, the voice they silenced, the desire they deemed shameful. They discover that these too are sacred, that saying I matter is not arrogance but truth, that loving oneself is not sin but survival. And something miraculous happens. Their empathy, once weaponized against them, transforms. No longer porous, it becomes discerning. They can feel another's suffering without mistaking it for their own. They can listen to another's pain without losing their voice in the process. They can love deeply without disappearing. This is the compassion the world truly needs. Not the empathy that self-destructs, but the empathy that radiates from a whole and anchored self. Slowly, the empath begins to re-enter life, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as a presence. Their laughter returns. Their dreams stir. Their voice, once muted, rises steady and strong. They are no longer the mirror for someone else's mask. They are the keeper of their own flame. And in that flame they discover a truth that feels both ancient and new. Compassion is not meant to be a chain. It is meant to be a circle that includes themselves at its very center. The empath finally understands. The unforgivable sin was never loving too much. It was forgetting that they too are worthy of love. Now they love not to erase themselves, but to express themselves. Not to heal others at any cost, but to walk beside them in shared humanity. Not to be consumed, but to be connected. The flame that once destroyed now sustains. And the empath reborn carries compassion, not as a weapon against the self, but as the ground of their wholeness. Healing is not about erasing the past. It is not about pretending the wounds never happened. It is about reclaiming what was lost within them and transforming the wound into wisdom. For the empath, this is the final revelation. Their sin was never that they cared too much. Their true error was believing that caring for themselves was a crime. That illusion is gone now. The chains of guilt have begun to dissolve. The compassion that once cut inward has turned outward again, balanced, discerning, radiant. They stand now not as a shadow, but as a whole being. The silence that once suffocated them has become choice. They can speak or remain quiet, not from fear, but from freedom. The invisibility that once consumed them has given way to presence. They take up space without apology. The guilt that once haunted them has transmuted into clarity. They know their worth is not measured by how much they bleed for others, but by the unshakable truth of their existence. Carl Jung described individuation as the union of opposites, the marriage of shadow and light. For the empath, this means embracing both their boundless compassion and their fierce right to exist as themselves. They no longer confuse sacrifice with love, nor boundaries with selfishness. They see now that true empathy requires wholeness, not fragmentation. And so they forgive themselves for every moment of silence, for every year of invisibility, for every time they mistook bondage for love. This forgiveness is not indulgence, it is liberation. It is the act of releasing themselves from the prison of guilt and stepping into the truth that was always waiting. I am worthy of the compassion I give so freely. I am allowed to exist in the circle of my own care. The narcissist may remain in their hall of mirrors, still searching for reflections to silence their inner void. But the empath is no longer trapped there. They have stepped outside into the clear air where mirrors are unnecessary because they can finally see themselves. The journey does not erase pain. Memories remain, scars remain, but the scars are no longer chains. They are markers of survival, reminders of the places where light broke in. The empath walks forward now with a new kind of compassion, not the compulsive need to heal what will not heal, but the steady presence of one who can stand in both love and truth. They can witness another's suffering without losing themselves in it. They can offer care without offering their soul as collateral. They can walk away when love becomes bondage, not from bitterness, but from wisdom. This is the liberation, the moment when compassion ceases to be a weapon against the self and becomes a shield of wholeness. The moment when guilt dissolves into clarity and silence transforms into voice. The moment when the empath becomes not a mirror, but a flame. And in that flame lies the deepest truth, that love is strongest when it includes the self. That empathy is most sacred when it flows in both directions. That the only unforgivable sin was ever believing that self-erasure was holy. Now that sin is forgiven, the soul is free. The empath emerges not diminished but expanded, no longer bound by chains of guilt, but alive, whole, and radiant. This is the true liberation. This is the gift of individuation. This is the moment the empath's compassion becomes not a curse but their crown,